Welcome back to Varnadore Films. I am Seth Varnadore. I am joined today by a very special guest. We have Bud Davis back for, it seems like, our yearly chat, coming in kind of in the off season here. Last year when we got together, it was kind of, and shockingly we're still talking about this saga, but it was on the heels of the Jaden Rashada saga and Florida's NIL apparatus kind of being up in the air. You've done kind of a really extensive look at different NIL apparatuses, and we talked last year about what the best one may be, what the best setup may be. The one you suggested, I think, ended up being pretty similar to what Florida's and Florida Victorious are doing now. So I wanted to get your take to start on kind of another, future look ahead, or kind of the future of college football stuff before we get into. We're going to talk Florida's roster construction, Florida's season outlook with the daunting schedule that everyone wants to talk about. We'll get to that, but we're going to start a little more general. So, what do you think is the future kind of college football player acquisition? Are we headed towards? Because you're a guy that you talk with people in collective, you talk with a lot of different people with your data analysis. Do you think we're heading towards like an NFL style front office situation?
Yeah, and I think we talked about that last year. And actually 2 years ago, we started off like, we were kind of excited and curious to see where this was going to go. We were like, hey, this could be like the Wild West. I mean, it could be the NFL with no contracts, no salary cap, free agency every year. And we're somewhere not quite there, but we're also not quite as regulated as the NFL. But one of the big things we've seen is the collectives, the fundraising, everything's gotten professionalized, more streamlined, professional fundraisers, big groups fundraising, different levels fundraising, more integrated with the athletic departments, more integrated with the player personnel side, with the recruiting, with the coaching. We're just seeing way more alignment in that space. And I think the future is really something like the NFL front office, and especially where they've been talking about changing some of the rules on who can recruit versus who can be an on-field coach, and separating those a little bit more. And I think it's good.
Yeah, it seems like with some of the recent rulings that have come down and some of the stuff that's being proposed where collectives will basically be brought in-house. Well, now you're really getting into, you're really be able to communicate between your personnel people and the money people now, or seemingly in the future. And then, like you said, the proposed rule of allowing analysts to coach on the field, which they're not doing right now, not at all. None of them are coaching on the field currently. But allowing, do you think we get to a point where because there's been a ton of talk amongst coaches about the recruiting calendar, how difficult it is, how hard it is on guys with families. Do you think we get to a point where you have coaches that just coach on the field and people that just go out and recruit?
Yeah, I think we will. And I think it's potentially one of the ways you save college football and get these coaches, these really high-level coaches, to stay at the college level rather than jump up to the pros. Because you're not asking them to be unicorns like Kirby Smart and Nick Saban, Urban Meyer, who can be great recruiters and, bring these great schemes and be great coaches, be great player development people. Now you can be a little bit more specialized. You can have a team that's great at recruiting, and you can have a team that's great at the on-field coaching and the scheming. And you can have a team that's doing player development, and you can have a team that's doing fundraising. And just, you don't have to try and find these unicorns. So I think ultimately it could potentially lead to a little bit more parity and a little bit more excitement at the college level. So, and just better work-life balance for all these guys too.
And this is something we've talked about privately as, the pressure starting to mount on Billy Napier. Some people wanted him fired after last season, and there is value in continuity. But one thing we talked about privately is if it starts to kind of go towards this model, would hiring a general manager over football be the way to have continuity, even if a coach is not performing on the field? Because you can get a new coach, but you still have the same people kind of running the show on the personnel side, because that's where the problems come up when you switch coaches, right? Is your personnel, especially now if guys leave, hard to recruit. Is that you think that we're going to get to a point where you got that GM role where maybe some guys, like maybe you give a Kirby Smart the Belichick treatment where he can do both, but maybe guys want to split it up a little bit. You think that's going to happen?
Yeah. If I'm in charge of UF, that's what I'm trying to make happen. We see there's a high cost of firing coaches. These transition classes are brutal. That's what Napier's going to feel it this year, is that transition class where he should have a nice core of upperclassmen. He had a weaker class, and now he doesn't have those guys he can rely on. And we see a lot of teams, these transition classes are just brutal for their ability to sustain performance consistently. If you can take away that burden of firing a coach, then all of a sudden it gives you a lot more freedom to optimize your on-field coaching if you can get that continuity from your recruiters and your GMs. So if I'm UF, I'm trying to set up a situation where I've got as much continuity as I can when I have coaches change. It's tough to do. And continuity doesn't always equal great recruiting. I think Billy Gonzalez has been here for how long? He should have great connections. He's in an extremely fertile wide receiver recruiting ground, and he doesn't dominate high school recruiting. But recruiting's not one thing.
No, that's for sure. And we talked a little bit about the possibility of general managers, possibility of totally separating on-field coaching and talent acquisition. Right. Another thing that seems like it's going to be brought over and would have to be collectively bargained, but is a salary cap. So I wanted to talk to you. There's numbers being thrown around right now, like $20 million-ish, and that's kind of a number we talked about last year, actually. Funnily enough, $20-ish million. Now, I don't know right now if all that would go to football, but I think there's a world where a football salary cap is in the $15 to $20 million.
Yeah.
So I want to talk to you just generally. Roster construction in a salary cap era where you really have 85 guys you've got to spread money across in some way. What's the best way to do that?
Yeah, and I don't think anybody has the perfect answer. I don't think there's a magic formula that works for every team. I don't think we can go to the NFL and look at how they pay players and say we should do that at the college level. They have a CBA. They have teams that you can game the rookie wage scale and get a cheap, great QB out of the draft. And I think in general, it's worth recognizing that how you win college football games is from a dozen, you need 30 guys. So if you don't want to pay all 85 the same, that's rule number one. You shouldn't pay everybody the same. You probably need about 30 guys that you're paying more, and it's going to be exponential where you're going to pay your best players the most. And you need to be okay with paying, your bottom 50 players significantly less. And if they want to walk, they can walk. And you need to have a strategy for being able to replace them or incentivizing them to stay until they see their big payday. It's a pretty tough question.
And I've seen you've got a chart on that, right? Kind of just what's the that's one I've seen you put out before, just the expected value of kind of the top end of your roster versus the bottom end of your roster.
Yeah, you want me to share that one?
Yeah, let's put that one up.
Here's your 85 players on the team down here. And then this is the fraction that each of them contributed in a single season to your positive production that year. And that's from SIS's basically points above replacement metric. So your number one player probably was so impactful. He accounted for 20% of the positive value your teams created that year. And a lot of that's going to be your QB1. But then you'll see it's also your cornerback one, linebackers, running backs. They have a lot of value there. And some of this is just how SIS computes impact. It's much harder to measure the impact of an offensive lineman and a defensive lineman versus a quarterback. So there's a little bit of bias there. But in general, you could look at snap counts too. 20 to 30 guys are mainly going to be the same dudes who are seeing the field, play in, play out. And so you want to make sure to win a championship. If your goal is just to win a championship in a single year, you want to maximize the talent of 20 or 30 players and really make sure you get the most bang for your buck. So, is that going all in on senior older guys? Is that going all in on a few elite recruits out of high school every cycle and, backloading with 3-star talent? It's kind of tough to know exactly how you want to do this, and it probably looks different for every team. But in general, I'd say quarterback. Let's see, do I have it? Yeah, I've got it here. This is a pretty nice one. So this is two things, but for our talk, the black box is looking at how high school recruiting rankings turn into points on the field. And these are the positions by order of importance. And it says offensive tackle, linebacker, running back, defensive end. Those are places where recruit ratings historically turn into on-field points at the highest rate. And then QB's further down here. It's not, a perfect metric because teams that usually recruit well at offensive tackle usually recruit well at quarterback too. So it's tough to untangle those. Probably you want elite talent at all of them. But I think this is just kind of a few things to keep in mind. So it's up to me. I want elite talent at quarterback. I want elite talent at offensive tackle, linebacker, cornerback. And then probably for me, I want wide receiver too. I think those guys make a huge impact. And a little bit we can talk about how – yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say that leads into my next question a little bit is, one thing I've seen around Florida fans right now, Florida does not have a quarterback committed. There's thoughts that they're going to take a shot at a couple guys, and if they don't get one, they can go in the portal. I think I've heard you say portaling for a quarterback is not a bad strategy, right? Quarterback is not one of the positions where we absolutely have to go get a high school guy to get somebody quality, right?
Yeah. And I think, I don't think with this past cycle, we saw a lot of quality at a lot of different positions, but I think quarterback, running back, wide receiver, those are typically the positions we see enter the portal at the highest rates, and they have great stats.
That's what's here in the graph, right? Yeah.
Yeah, these bars are, this is a couple of years old now, but this is the relative rates each position enters the portal. So the average is this red dotted line here, and so QB is much higher. It's roughly like a third of quarterback recruits enter the portal. There's a ton of QBs in there, and if they've got stats from their previous program, that's great. You can use that to predict it forward. But we've seen Joe Burrow, we've seen guys win the Heisman, we've seen guys win national championships. There is abundant portal talent. I think one of the things you need to think about is most of those portal QBs need 2 years. They peak in their second year. Their first year is usually okay, pretty good. And then we see that next year is really when they take a big step. So I think one of the hopes is we see that from Mertz this year.
Yeah, and we could go ahead and get into Florida's roster because that's kind of what I wanted to ask on the portal versus high school. There are certain positions that, obviously you'd rather get your it'd be great to be able to go get an elite tackles, but they're not always there. Now Florida was able to get some, and we'll talk about them in a little bit. But that's much harder to find typically. So, but yeah, let's talk about Florida's roster now. So you mentioned it. Mertz will be in his second year in the system. Last year it was kind of after he signed on, there was a lot of, it was not a super well received signing. But watching him last year before the season, he kind of lacked some consistency, and I thought he was pretty good for Florida last year. So,
yeah, I agree.
What are your thoughts on him and kind of what they were able to do offensively to kind of get the roster where it is right now?
Yeah, so I think we saw that. Well, let's do a quick season recap. Let's go there.
Yeah.
So let's make sure we're on the same page. So this is the adjusted offensive EPA and defensive EPA per play. So this is basically on average how many points was each play that your offense and defense was on the field worth. And then, we adjust it for the opponent quality. And Florida's down here in the bottom right, which isn't a terrible place to be, but it's not great. It's definitely below expectations. So we're to the right of this dotted line. We had an above average offense, which was good. Offense played pretty well. And we had a below average defense. Our defense was pretty bad, like Georgia Tech bad. And I think one thing we'll kind of see is a lot of our opponents are living right now up here in this upper right box of good offense and defense. And so that's tough when you're not a well-rounded team. It's tough to compete with teams that are.
And I was looking back at the previous season, and it was pretty similar, I think. Napier's first year. The defense is just the offense has been above average both years to pretty decent to bordering on good, and then the defense has been bad the entire time. So,
yeah. And we saw, in general, we had a good passing offense. So now this is looking at just the offense with passing on the X and rushing on the Y. We had an above average passing offense, which is good. That's one of the more predictive things you can have in college football. And our rushing offense was just average, which isn't great considering how much we ran the ball. But also, could have been below average. So pretty good offensive profile. By no means were we, elite, like, the LSU's, Georgia's, Ohio State's, Oklahoma's, but we were still pretty good. And then defense, we had the opposite. We were a bad passing defense and our average rushing defense. And being a bad passing defense is very much not something you want because it is something that carries over game to game. It is predictive game to game. And you get gashed pretty heavily for it. And I think that's what we saw. So generally the numbers line up with what we saw with our eyes. Good passing offense, fair rushing attack, fair rushing defense, bad pass defense. Kind of with that in mind, we knew where our roster was at the end of November, and I tweeted this out, this one on the left. So that this chart of positive team production, now that's broken out by position. So QB, running back, wide receiver, tight end, tackle, center, guard, and then position on the depth chart. So this is QB1, and this is your backup QB. This is your running back 1, running back 2, running back 3. And what you can kind of see from this is your QB1 is going to be responsible for most of your team production, somewhere between 5 and 22%. And so you need to have somebody pretty good penciled in here. And at the end of November, I tried to pencil in a guy for all of these different boxes that we can see. So we got Mertz up here and Lagway. That's a pretty good QB room. Running backs, fine. We've got Johnson, Webb. I had Carroll here in November. And I think I started to get worried when I got down to this wide receiver room because really it's Wilson, ? And then hoping Gene and Mizell would come through. And this is where we can kind of start comparing to present day because I think this is where the staff – I think wide receiver is one thing I want to talk a little bit more about because I thought the staff did a good job recognizing this gap and filling it. And that's kind of something we've struggled with the past 2 years. We've gone in, to these off seasons with obvious gaps on the roster and have kind of just been like, oh, well, our guys will develop. And this was one of the first years where our staff was like, hey, we've got a gap on the roster. Let's try and go out and get a guy. And they went out and got a couple guys. Like I really like Badger and Dyke. And I think being able to count on them for your wide receiver 2 and 3 and taking some of that pressure off Gene and Mizell to develop, hopefully one of them hits. I thought that was really good. Similarly, at tackle, we had this gap after Austin Barber, and they went out and got 2 guys that got Crenshaw, Dixon, and Manuel, who I like both of those ads a lot. And then, take some of the pressure off. Waits to be a contributor. We've got Slaughter that's pretty good. We lost some guys in the interior line, but, I think we can move around some guys like George. Now, he's not having to be a tackle for you. And then, we're going to have to rely on the interior O-line for some development there with Harris and Lovett, but it's not out of the question. I mean, interior O-line, it's not a bad place to be able to rotate people.
And I think there's also a possibility of, whoever's the odd man out in that tackle group maybe kicking inside too. So
yeah, agreed.
Funnily enough, so heard Billy Napier, and this was kind of I think it was the last thing I put out, was hearing him speak at a clinic, and he said, we were playing guards at tackle last year.
Yeah.
So we've already seen one move. Barber wasn't full go for spring, so I don't know if they've already got him penciled in to move inside, or if that was more off the cuff and he was really just referencing George. But that's one that's one to watch.
Yeah, and I think it mainly was George, but
it makes sense.
Yeah, I like our offense overall so much better than we have in the years past. And I think we had a pretty good offense last year, and I think we have the potential to make a big step up next year. With Bart's year 2 as a transfer, that's potential for a big step up. We've got 3 wide receiver options, which is so much better than just 1 or 2. When you've got 3, you start getting tough to defend. It stinks we don't have ETN, because I think if we had an explosive player like him, I think, you'd look at this offense and be like, we can win games. I still think this offense is going to win us games. But I'm not as confident if we had a guy like him. Defense, I think there's more question marks, which is frustrating because we're in year 3 of this. But I did like, we had Shamar James as linebacker 1, and was an obvious gap here. And we ended up losing Williams and Nunnery too. So this linebacker room's looking pretty weak in November and across most of the portal season. But going out and getting a guy like Pup Howard that you're like, hey, that can be our LB2. That's great. I'm fine with Wingo being an LB3 and then counting on maybe Robinson, Graham, one of these young guys to get some time. That's fine. A guy like Graham, getting him on the field in like 3rd down or something, that could be fun. Similar safety. I liked this a lot. We basically had Castle and Thornton as guys come back. They got put in what I think was a bad position last year. And now you've got 3 new guys who can fill in this gap and take some of that pressure off, who have experience, who should be pretty decent. You don't have to go 3 for 3 on your portal ads, but it's just recognizing a roster gap and filling it in. CB, I would have really liked to have kept Hill. I only expected to get one of Hill or Marshall back. And I think Marshall Moore, that's a pretty good one too. I'm fine with that. I'd feel better if we had Hill too, but hopefully one of Denson, Jackson, Dijon, one of those guys can kind of round that up. I would have liked maybe another portal ad here, and we'll see maybe Bridges slides over. But yeah, that's kind of my feelings on the DB side. And then love all the DEs, the defensive ends we're bringing back. Losing Princely stinks. He's another one of those guys. Princely and Hills that are SEC caliber guys. Like, keeping them on your roster, that would be great. But I feel pretty good about our defensive ends. Sat Boone are pretty solid, and then Collins and Searcy both played well. And for being your 3-4 option there, that's fine. Cam Jackson, feel really good about him. And then getting a guy like Slackman, who can be potential DT2, take some of the pressure off Banks and Lyons to be your guys. So just in general, like, the whole portal approach, just way happier with it this year.
Yeah, and I'm really interested to see how kind of the final returning production numbers shake out, because I looked at it earlier this year, and this is the most returning production Florida's had since 2019 overall.
Yeah.
And offensively, since 2019 by far. So this is the most returning production Napier's had by far. In 2022 and 2023 overall, they were in the hundreds in both offense or overall and offense. So this will be kind of the first year and that's something they've been touting, is snap counts, snap counts, snap counts. And that is I did run those as well, but there's so many more. And I know you have some data on kind of the receiver side of it. There's so much more experience in the system, which I think will be helpful. And then you bring in some experienced guys in the portal that should be able to kind of hit the ground running.
Yeah, and I think what's frustrating is, I can understand us having bad returning production for, Napier's first year. Guys leave when you change coaches. We should have had that figured out for last year. But it is nice to see. It does seem like the staff has adapted and figured out what this new landscape looks like and built a more complete roster this year.
Well, that's my new pet theory, is that if you aren't good immediately, because the whole thing was, forever, hey, give a guy time. And that was what we were told. Napier was told he's going to have time to fix it. And especially now in the free transfer portal era, if you don't win immediately, you're just going to be in perpetual year ones, because guys are just going to leave and you're going to be starting over. You're going to have to replace a bunch. So I think the fact that they were able to retain so many guys, they lost a good bit, but they were able to retain a lot of guys and bring in some experience. That'll help. So
I think we net came out on top on the portal, which that kind of surprised me because it was looking pretty dire there for a bit.
Especially with the guys that lost on the high end. They lost some really, really good players, and you end up, I think they ended up with a top 10 portal class. I saw somewhere maybe 24/7. So to end up there after kind of where it started is a pretty good close. Now, obviously, they got to go and win some games, but
Let's talk about the receivers, because I really liked the receiver ads. We'll just kind of do the positive numbers. I think this is like a cool chart for optimism. So this is on the x-axis. This is how many yards the wide receivers and tight ends had who are on your roster now in the previous season. And then this is how many yards they gained per route. So far to the right means you got a lot of returning production, and then higher you are, you have a really lot of high quality returning production. So, 21, 22, 23, we both had low returning production, and we had a lot of middling quality returning production. We didn't really have many elite guys. And then 24, this is kind of where we were shaping up, is this dot. And then we added Badger. So we got a ton more returning production. And this dot up here is, if rather than using Badger and Dyke's 2023 numbers, if we use their 2022 numbers, we have, instead of 2023, those guys, both of them went off in 2022. So if we can get that type of performance from them, this is a pretty stacked team. We have a lot of returning production and a lot of high quality returning production. Really, the only thing comparable is 2019, 2020. And those were some really good receiving cores. So I think, I feel good about our wide receiver returning production and the quality of Dyke, Badger, and Wilson. I love those three guys, and I feel confident in Mertz in year two. And I think if you're confident in your passing offense, a lot of things can shake out positive for you. And we'll need
it. I'm excited to see what Ron Roberts does, but I don't think that's something you can quite hang your hat on just yet. I think the offense is obviously going to need to be firing on all cylinders for Florida to kind of have a chance. And one of those reasons, I do want to talk about DK. I know he had kind of a lackluster spring game, and but I was able to. I know you have. He only had a couple catches. I was able. when I was able to go to practice, I went to the coaches clinic again this year, which is always really good. And I was able to watch some practice. And he was a guy that constantly was like a third down guy. He made a bunch of plays that day when they were doing third down situationally. Mertz found him over the middle 3 or 4 times. So I think he'll serve a role, and I think he'll be helpful.
Yeah.
I think it was somewhat I think his effectiveness maybe, hopefully, is more of what I saw in practice than what we saw in the spring game.
Yeah, I think, you kind of, this is an interesting chart. So this is targets per route. So this is basically how much QBs like the guy. How much does this guy get open? And then this is yards per catchable target. So when a ball gets thrown to him, how many yards do they generate? And Pearsall's right here. So this is a guy who he gets a pretty good amount of targets, and when he gets the ball, he gets yards. So this is a guy we got to replace. And we went out and got Dyke, who his 2022 number is very similar to Pearsall. And we got Badger, who this is 23 numbers. Badger was just a high efficiency yak machine. Pretty shallow passes. That's what he was getting. He was getting shallow passes, and he was turning them into yards. And honestly, I think that fits with, between Dyke, Badger, Wilson. They all kind of similar skill sets. None of them's a true X. They're all a little bit more efficiency, explosive, yak type guys. But, you look at what Wilson or what Mertz does well, and it's generally he passes the ball short, at a really high rate. He takes these efficient passes. He's very good at executing them. He's less good downfield. Eventually you got to make explosive plays. I think we have 3 explosive wide receivers. Even if they're not your true X's that you're throwing deep balls to, I'm hopeful we can generate some explosive plays with those guys, and I think it does ultimately complement Mertz's skill set.
Yeah, he hit a couple of deep crossers in practice that were really nicely thrown, and we saw that big play to Wilson in the spring game. So hopefully, I'd imagine that's kind of his point of emphasis this year. I think he's even mentioned it in a couple interviews that we want to be able to push the ball downfield, and I think the tackle group they brought in will probably be helpful in that as well. So.
Yeah. I mean, and the tackles we got. This is PFF, but we now have 3 tackles that are among the highest graded in the SEC. That's what you want. So went out and got some dudes, and we needed it because Mertz was pretty bad at taking sacks last year.
Yes.
Some people pin it on Napier's offense, but you and I have been looking at it for 2 years. We saw the same plays executed by Anthony Richardson, look much different from the same plays executed by Graham Mertz, where Richardson was deep shot, deep shot, deep shot. I'm focusing on the deep ball here. And Mertz is much more, I'm going to take the shorter, efficient, routes on this combination.
Yeah, I think we looked at at one point last year, we looked at every sack. I think it was maybe through the bye week.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe after. I think we kind of came to the conclusion that about 25% of it was on Mertz.
Yeah.
Like if we were assigning blame. So he could throw the ball away. He could, there's some things he could help clean them up. But I think those guys being a little bit better up front will help him a ton too. And they're going to need it because let's talk season outlook to end here.
Let's do it.
I think I feel that Florida will be better than people think. I don't think they're not a bad team. But unfortunately, they play a really tough schedule, and you might have a lot of toss-ups in there, and those are kind of, they can go either way. That's why they call it toss-ups. So let's talk a little bit about Florida's schedule this year and their outlook for the season after talking, is the roster they put together good enough to make a bowl game?
And I think, first off, I'm on this before we start explaining on this. I think I'm on the same page. I think Florida is better than people expect. but I think we have a lot of toss-up games, and it's tough when you start doing the math. If I give you 12 coin flips and you got to get 8 heads to keep your job, like that's hard.
Yeah. The problem is there's only one, maybe 2 slam dunks on the schedule.
Agreed. All right, so what we're looking at is, I'm going to post this tomorrow, but this is the market-derived team tiers. So that's what these are, these tiers right here. And then the numbers underneath them are a power rating. And so what you can do, and what I did was took the Vegas win totals. Right now, Florida's at 4.5. And you can take the win totals for every team, and you can take the schedule of every team, and you can figure out how good Vegas thinks they are, and ultimately come up with a win expectancy for every game and back into a power rating for every game, or for every team. And so Florida's power rating comes out to be 10, which I think a little bit low. Georgia's at 30. And so what this is against an average FBS team, how much would you be favored by? Georgia's passes the sniff test. I think they probably would be favored by 4 touchdowns against an average FBS team, which is like your Tulanes, Boise's, Virginia. They're probably getting 4 touchdowns, 3 or 4. And then Florida's only 10 above that. I think Florida's probably should be somewhere like 13 or so. Problem is, almost the whole schedule's above us. We looked at that. Yeah. And we looked at that graph of, all of our opponents finished in that top right. Everybody we're playing is just in a really good spot right now. These are pretty stable programs. Teams like FSU that have kind of turned it around a little bit, or Miami that have had a few good years of recruiting. Tennessee that might have a good system, Kentucky that has some stability. And then we're playing the 2 hardest teams in the country in Texas and Georgia, which is brutal. Catching Ole Miss and LSU in potential up years, although I'm not quite as sold on LSU as maybe Vegas is. Same with FSU, Tennessee. I think they could be a little bit lower. These are probably a little bit, in my mind, more true coin flips. But, the problem is what we talked about. You have 12 games and 11 of them are at best coin flips. You're going to turn it into 5.5 wins. And is that good enough for Napier to keep his job? And, you look at this schedule and it's brutal. Having UCF and Miami in the same year when they're both pretty good, top 25 or just outside it, quality is really hard. We have I don't think I've got it on here, but basically what I can do is, this is our projected wins right here. And so if I take that Vegas power rating and I say, it's reasonable for Vegas to maybe be off on the Gators by 2 standard deviations on that power rating, how many wins do we get? And so 7, potentially get to 7 wins. And that's without luck or fluky things, which college football has those. So, 7 wins just by Vegas being off on the Gators seems about right. And then I think, with some luck, maybe getting an 8, but it's tough. It's a brutal schedule. Let me see if I can pull up quick.
I think one way to easily conceptualize the coin flip thing is just look back to last season, right? Like, Florida probably went 1-2. Like, South Carolina game easily could have gone the other way. On the other end, Arkansas and Missouri could have easily gone the other way. So you go from winning 7 games and feeling really good about yourself, or winning 4, and that's kind of the nature of it. If you're in a lot of close games, Napier's record in close games at Louisiana was really good, but I think it's maybe a little bit more random, I'd guess, as we get into tighter games than totally skill based. But I don't know. I haven't quite heard anybody really say which way to think about that.
No, and I think generally you just got to kind of appreciate that college football is a little bit fluky, and that's why we watch it.
Yeah.
That's what makes it exciting. Is I can't the spreadsheet numbers I'm going to put up here aren't going to be perfectly predictive, and that's what makes it fun. That's why we like watching it. If it was watching people flip coins, we wouldn't actually watch it. But the excitement of not knowing how it's going to come out is what makes it fun. I think here's some more context for just how tough our schedule is.
Yeah.
So here's our power rating here on the bottom, and then here's our average opponent's power rating. And we are far and away the toughest schedule. We play an average opponent with a power rating of 13. We're playing an average opponent that's roughly Auburn and Miami quality and top 25 quality. So our opponents are good, top 20, top 25 teams. And that's week in, week out. So just keep that in mind if we lose some games. The next hardest schedule is USC at 10-ish. Basically, USC would have to play their entire schedule away, only away games for it to be as hard as ours. And then Miami or Michigan, Oklahoma, Georgia, they've got some tough schedules. UCLA, but they're not 5 points. 5 points is a ton when you're talking about this college football, and it's just ridiculous. I think Florida's got to be smarter about scheduling going forward. It's brutal that we're going to have the same SEC. Our SEC slate is really tough, and we're going to have the same one in 2025, and that's really hard. And so, are we going to measure Napier's success in wins and losses? I think you can a little bit. I don't think anybody's expecting him to go 12-0 against this slate, but if we were a top 10 to 15 team instead of a back end top 25 team, we're probably feeling a lot more confident about this season. Florida's here at this team power rating around 10. We should be over here. We should be much closer to 20, and we shouldn't be counting on Vegas being wrong about Florida to get us there. We should have demonstrated this, over the past couple of years. And I think, Napier had some missteps in his early recruiting and portal strategy and just roster construction strategy that, we're feeling a couple of years later. And I think that's hard.
I think the year one portal stuff is like the original sin of his tenure. That's the thing kind of hanging a cloud over everything. And I would love to get, because you read some things, you hear some things that maybe when he first came in, they had money guaranteed to guys, and there wasn't a lot other money left. That was one rumor I heard, that guys in the roster were guaranteed money, and basically if you sent them back into the portal, they already had signed contracts or whatever with the collective. If you sent them back into the portal, you weren't getting more money. So it's kind of like I could get rid of these guys and not bring people in, or keep them, see what I got. That was one rumor. That would explain some of the inaction the first year. But if not, that's like that's really the issue. You got to hit the ground running nowadays. So that first
you
kind
look
of cycle set the tone, unfortunately.
We talked about this maybe December, looking at Texas, and Texas flipped that roster. I think they ended up losing 40 guys, net 40. They basically whole team gone, and took some huge. They took high school classes that focused on trench players that then paid off years down the line, and they went out and got guys like Quinn Ewers and really just were selective. The guys they did keep from the previous tenure, basically they went 100% on. And you kind of compare that to Florida. We kept a lot of guys around who weren't very good. I think
they were getting
slow.
paid.
Yeah, and we were paying them, and we were very slow to flip the roster. I think Napier in general has done stuff pretty slowly.
Yeah.
It's okay to be deliberate if you're going to be right. It's tough to
Yeah.
be slow and make missteps.
Yeah.
And then I think, I get frustrated because I think one of the only times he's gone fast is when he let the coaches go before early signing day. And we've talked about that. That's a great thing to do for the coaches. Give them more
Yes.
time to find a job. That just helped blow up that class. And it's like, man, I just feel like we can't catch a break sometimes.
Yeah, it's and interesting, kind of an interesting parallel. The other team I covered, USF, their coach recently gave an interview, but you could see it. Like we talked to him about it last year. They turned over the roster like Colorado did. They had like 40 or 50 guys out, and totally flipped it. And he talked about it recently, and his thing was, I wanted to get the team as good as fast as I could, and then use that to recruit high school players. So I went hard in the portal the first year. And then use that to show proof of concept, and then then use that to recruit high school players, and then fill in with the transfer portal as needed. So I thought that was seemed to be the exactly right strategy, and they made a bowl game, and now they got the number 1 recruiting class in the G5, and they're kind of humming. Compared to relative years.
All it takes is, I really think Napier, if he nailed the portal ads, from this cycle. If those guys hit, this is a good team. And, maybe we don't win 12 games, but I think we go bowling. If those portal ads hit, I think we can get to 8. I think we can be a top, 15 team, and that's what you need against the schedule. So
if Florida gets to 8, they probably would have an outside chance of the playoff, depending on what the 8 were.
Yeah.
Is what's great. The schedule is so difficult.
Florida gets to 8, people got to be very happy with Napier, and I would be very impressed with this team.
Yeah, I think it'd be a great. So we're shooting for 8. That's the goal. I mean, really, a bowl game.
I want a bowl game. I mean, 6. I'm starting to be happy with.
A bowl game.
I'm happy with.
A bowl game is all right. We can keep the experiment going, I think. But
yeah, exactly.
So, Bud, thank you so much for jumping on. Always provide awesome stuff for us, awesome data, awesome analysis. So I appreciate you jumping on with me and talking a little Gator football.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. Thanks.
All right. See you, bud.